So here's a question for you. How can a general win every single battle he fights for an entire decade and still somehow lose the war? I mean, it sounds impossible, right? But that is exactly what happened to John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough. His story is one of the great paradoxes in all of military history. A commander who was tactical perfect, but saw the ultimate strategic prize just slip right through his fingers. And get this, Marlborough wasn't even alone. He was one half of this legendary military duo. His partner in crime, Prince Eugene of Savoy, was so unbelievably brilliant that Napoleon Bonaparte, yep, that Napoleon, named him one of the 7 greatest commanders in all of history. You know, when Napoleon tells you to study a guy, you're dealing with an absolute genius. And here they are. These two men, the English Duke of Marlborough and the Austrian Prince Eugene of Savoy, they formed what was, without a doubt, the greatest military partnership of their age. They came from totally different worlds, but they came together to decide the fate of one of Europe's most important conflicts ever. So, what kind of massive crisis could possibly bring these two titans together? Well, the answer was a war for the fate of an entire continent, the War of the Spanish Succession. And believe me, the stakes could not have been higher. Okay, so what you're looking at here is the geopolitical nightmare that was facing Europe back in 1701. The King of Spain died without an heir, and he left his entire empire to the grandson of France's super-powerful King Louis XIV. This move threatened to create this giant Franco-Spanish superpower, a universal monarchy, that could just steamroll the entire continent. The rest of Europe knew, right then and there, it had to fight back. To counter this threat, the Grand Alliance was formed, and at its head were Marlborough and Eugene. And they were just a perfect odd couple. Marlborough was the ultimate statesman general, a master of diplomacy who somehow held this fragile coalition together. And then you had Eugene, a French exile who swore his loyalty to Austria. He was the ferocious battlefield commander, the guy who inspired his men to do the impossible. Put him together, they were unstoppable. And their partnership was about to be tested in what was supposed to be the war's biggest moment. See, by 1704, France and its ally Bavaria were ready to strike a knockout blow by capturing Vienna, the Austrian capital. The whole Grand Alliance was on the verge of collapse. It all came down to one single battle, Blenheim. To save Vienna, Marlborough did something absolutely audacious. He marched his army over 250 miles, all the way from the Netherlands to the Danube River in southern Germany, and he tricked both his enemies and his allies about where he was really going. It was this huge gamble, designed to do just one thing: link up with Eugene and force a fight that would decide everything. On August 13, 1704, the stage was set. The Allied army, under Marlborough and Eugene, faced the French and Bavarian forces across this little stream called the Nebel. The French commanders? They were confident. They thought they had a great defensive position and that the Allies were marching straight into a death trap. But the French had a fatal weakness. Their command was a total mess. The two generals, Tallard and Marsin, were pretty inexperienced, and they could not agree on a strategy. So they basically fought as 2 separate armies instead of one unified force. And that disunity, it was about to prove catastrophic. In stark contrast, Marlborough and Eugene pulled off a coordinated masterpiece. The plan was simple, but it was brilliant. First, they hit both French flanks to pin them down, making sure they couldn't send reinforcements to the middle. Then, once the flanks were stuck, Marlborough unleashed this massive combined infantry and cavalry charge that just shattered the weak French center, splitting their army in 2 and leading to a total collapse. The result was a complete and total annihilation. The French and their Bavarian allies suffered up to 40,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. I mean, this was a defeat on a scale France hadn't seen in decades. An entire army was just wiped from the map. The shockwave from Blenheim was immense. When King Louis XIV heard the news, he was reportedly so stunned that people around him thought he'd had a stroke. The myth of French invincibility, which he had built for over 40 years, was shattered in a single afternoon. So this should have been the end of the story, right? The Grand Alliance had won this stunning, decisive victory. Vienna was saved, the French were humbled, and yet, the war didn't end. This is where we get to the real heart of the paradox. So if you win a victory this complete, one that saves your entire alliance and just shatters your enemy's aura, why doesn't that win you the war? Well, the answer, it turns out, has a lot less to do with cannons and cavalry and everything to do with politics.
Because after Blenheim in 1704, Marlborough just kept winning. Ramillies in 1706, Oudenarde in 1708, even the incredibly bloody, costly victory at Malplaquet in 1709, he was undefeated for 10 straight campaigns, but not one of these battles delivered that final knockout blow for peace.
I mean, the contradiction is just staring you in the face. On one side, you have a flawless military record. On the other, you have the political reality. A French Bourbon king stayed on the Spanish throne, the Grand Alliance fell apart, and Marlborough himself was eventually fired. How on earth does that happen? Well, the first problem was that the entire political landscape shifted right under their feet. In 1711, the Habsburg emperor died, and when you know it, the Allies' own candidate for the Spanish throne, a guy named Charles, he unexpectedly inherited the Austrian Empire. So suddenly, a complete Allied victory would just replace a French superpower with an Austrian one, creating the exact same imbalance of power the war was supposed to prevent. The whole point of the war became, as one historian put it, absurd. The second blow came from his own home. Marlborough's political allies in London were voted out of power. The new government wanted peace, and frankly, they were willing to get it by any means necessary. So they started secret negotiations with France, behind the backs of their allies, and, crucially, behind the back of their own top general, the Duke of Marlborough. Just like that, his political support vanished. So we come back to that central question. How do you win every single battle, but still lose the war? Well, you do it when the politics change, when your strategic goals become irrelevant, and when your own government starts working against you. That's when even the greatest general in the world can't force a military solution to what has become a political problem. The war finally whimpered to an end with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, and while the politicians back in London got exactly what they wanted, that peace came at a very, very high price for some of the allies who had put their trust in them. For Great Britain, the peace was a huge strategic win. They secured Gibraltar, they got valuable trade rights, and France officially recognized the Protestant succession to the British throne. By abandoning the original war aims, the British politicians made sure their own national interests were secured. But this peace came at a direct and terrible cost to allies like the Catalans. They had joined the war because they were promised support from the Grand Alliance, only to be completely abandoned at the treaty. Refusing to surrender, they fought on alone against both France and Spain. Their capital, Barcelona, eventually fell after a brutal siege, and their historic autonomy was just abolished. They were, in effect, the price of Britain's peace. And so, the story of Marlborough leaves us with this timeless and really difficult question. It proves that military success doesn't automatically equal political victory. And it forces us to ask, in the brutal calculus of war and politics, what truly matters more, winning the battle or winning the peace?